December 16, 1944. The German army launches a huge operation on the Western Front, this being the last of all that has any chance of having any kind of impact on the conflict. About this risky and desperate military operation, there are many topics that are still valid today. Some of the most striking are that the Germans ran out of gas, that the operation was too ambitious or that it made no sense, that aviation had no impact, or finally, that the Allies did not know anything about the German plan and that the attack caught them by surprise. Although some are true, and others are very nuanced, today we are going to focus on a topic that is never usually analyzed, this being the information that the Allies had about this operation, and to what extent they were surprised by this last great attack of the German army. So, were the Germans able to completely camouflage the three armies they used for this attack? Was some type of information leaked that could put the Allies on alert? Why did the Allied High Command ignore the warnings it received? Well, let's analyze it. Generally, what is always said is that the Allied intelligence services were incompetent and that they did not know anything, but this is far from being the case. As we will see, there were many signs that the Germans were preparing something important in the area, but since everyone considered Germany defeated, these warnings were ignored. As we analyzed a few weeks ago, from the first moment Hitler tried to ensure that all the planning and preparations for this operation were carried out with the greatest secrecy. German high command officers were forbidden to discuss the matter with lower officers, and any leak of information was punishable by death. In order not to arouse suspicion in the enemy, the operation was called Guard on the Rhine, appearing to be some defensive maneuver. However, despite the intentions of the German leader, the secret was not kept for long and all kinds of rumors circulated far and wide on the Western Front. So much so that the news reached the German officers who were prisoners of the British. Specifically, General Eberbach, who had stood out during the fighting in Normandy, and who was later captured, was recorded in mid-November in the British prison camp where he was being held, saying that a major attack in the West was being prepared with 46 divisions. This comment alone should have set off all the alarms, but he didn't. Surely the Allies considered that the German generals were victims of the war propaganda that was instilled in them from Germany. Other lower-ranking soldiers who were captured in mid- and late November also stated that some large-scale attack was being prepared on the Western Front, and although they did not say so in their own words, the fact that they had been transferred there gave them away. Thus, many troop movements had been detected in the German Eifel region, which bordered the Ardennes. However, the Allies thought that it was simply a quiet place, where the Germans sent their worn-out units to be rebuilt. Finally, the German reinforcement of these positions was interpreted by the Allies as a natural reinforcement that the Germans were making in the sector, to protect their industrial region in the Ruhr Basin. By way of conclusion, we can say that without a doubt the Allies were receiving a multitude of warnings and signs that something was happening, but due to the opinion they had of the Germans at that time, they were the ones who justified the actions of their adversary. And they gave him the explanation that was closest to his way of seeing things. At this point we have to ask ourselves what was the opinion that the Allied High Command had about the Germans, and why they did not know how to see the attack through the Ardennes. In general terms, the Allies considered that the German army was completely weakened and depleted, after the last months of hard fighting on both the Eastern and Western fronts. They also considered that the Germans would use all their reserves to try to stop the Red Army, which at this time was advancing through the Balkans and was attacking the last allies that Germany kept in Hungary. In addition, the Allies were well aware of the total shortage of fuel, ammunition, and material of all kinds that Germany had. This made it impossible to mount any kind of large-scale offensive against them. The Committee of the Allied Joint Intelligence Services had estimated months before that the main problem that the Germans had was the lack of fuel, which prevented them from being able to move their panzer divisions and use their aviation with total freedom. The report concluded by stating that this was the German Achilles heel. Another factor that made them dismiss this operation was that the commander-in-chief of the West was Field Marshal von Rundstedt, who was also considered incapable of proposing an offensive of such magnitude. Finally, the Allies had two elements in which they had full confidence, and that this time played against them. The first was their total superiority in the skies, with which they felt completely safe, since it served as a powerful weapon of intimidation for the Germans. With absolute control of the skies, there was no need to fear any German offensive, as it would quickly be dismantled by the Air Force, which would attack all its vanguard and supply columns. The second element in which the Allies placed all their trust was the information obtained by the ultra-analysts, which had served time and time again to dismantle all German plans. However, this time it was different, as the German leader had categorically prohibited any communication about this operation from being sent by radio. To this is added a total radio silence that the Germans made from December 10th. Although in an earlier time this would have been very suspicious and would have been clear evidence that an operation was being prepared, this time the British intelligence services thought that the German army was so weak that it had nothing to communicate. The only communication that they did detect was a transmission on October 26 in which it was said that by order of Hitler, a special force was being created for an infiltration mission in Allied territory. The requirement to enlist in this unit was to know how to speak English. Again, this information did not have much interest in the Allied command. As we have seen, this was the opinion that the Allied High Command had about Germany at the end of 1944, so despite having indicators and warnings that the Germans were preparing something, they did not take this information seriously. What they did was excuse the Germans, and give their movements an explanation consistent with what they themselves believed. Even so, Eisenhower's own intelligence chief, General Strong, had warned of a possible German offensive in the Ardennes region. This caused Eisenhower and the rest of his companions to stupefy, but he gave himself the order to send some divisions near Luxembourg so that they could intervene quickly if something happened. The attitude of other Allied high command, such as Montgomery's, was very different. In a meeting just hours before the German attack, Field Marshal Montgomery asked Eisenhower if he would mind if he returned to England in the next few days to spend Christmas there. When someone suggested that they had warnings that the Germans might launch an attack, Montgomery said there was nothing to worry about. The lack of troops, equipment, and resources of the Germans make any offensive action on their part impossible, the English Marshal concluded. Finally, on December 16, 1944 at 5:30 in the morning, the Germans began their last major offensive, for which they gathered an amount of material, troops, and resources, which the Allies never thought that the Germans could still have at this point in the conflict. This is without a doubt a clear example that you should never, never consider an enemy defeated, and that you should never trust or underestimate your opponent even if everything indicates that he is in a bad situation. Although the German offensive could be contained, this was due to the fact that the Allies had many troops throughout the Western Front that could quickly be diverted to the area, to their air superiority as soon as the skies cleared of clouds, to the Soviet presence on the Eastern Front that held back most of the German forces, and lastly, the Germans' own mistakes and weakness of their attack. What we mean is that even with all this, the Germans came close to dealing a major defeat to the Allies as late as December 1944. In any case, stay tuned because we will soon publish a program in which we will analyze the causes of the German defeat in this operation. I recommend that you watch the program that we uploaded recently in which we precisely talked about the ambitious objectives pursued by this latest attack, which is the first video of this series on the Ardennes that we are doing. Thank you all for being a part of this community, and especially the sponsors who make this possible. Subscribe and share this program if you liked it, and see you in the next one. See you soon.